Contour lines. First of all, let's think about the setup a little bit differently. When we have a light source from this side, it tends to bring out shadows, and it also tends to bring out surface texture. So make sure your light is oriented to one side. I want to see a light side, a shadow side of the subject, and a setting. Here I used a paper bag to make sort of a landscape for this little hut. Please also choose something that has texture. That's going to help us a lot with this. And also choose something inspired. Do something fun that you want to draw. I want you to consider that line variation can be an expression of light. So I'm looking at my subject, the light's coming from the left, and so I'm drawing very lightly on the side of the form that's toward the light source, and I'm drawing darker on the side of the form that's away from the light source. Here you'll see what I mean. Lighter side of the structure of the subject, lighter lines. The dark side of the subject, darker lines. Already at this point, we're starting to get a sense of a light side and a dark side just from contour lines. So it's not just an outline, which I think is one of the misconceptions of the term contour lines. By the end of this video, hopefully you're going to see that it's a useful kind of line and that there are several dimensions, even more than we show, that the contour line can be useful for. That's the light dimension of contour lines. And now the next is the boundary dimension of contour lines. By boundaries, I mean areas where two different values come together or two different colors come together. So here I'm sort of mapping out shadowy areas. These are areas on the form that are just a bit darker than other areas. Here I'm looking at the boundary between where the shadow is being cast onto the background or setting versus areas that are hit by direct light. These are our contour lines expressing boundaries. And next, let's see what we can do with that information without overpowering our use of lines. Here's a rough piece of paper. I'm sharpening vine charcoal and taking a little bit on my chamois cloth. I'm going very light. I don't want to overcommit to darker values because they're going to overpower the sensitive lines if I do that. It's always easier to come back later and make an area darker, and it's much more difficult to lighten up an overcommitted dark black with any precision. Have you noticed our initial tendency is to go too dark? A dull point is useful for laying in darker shadow areas very lightly, like I'm doing here. The paper has enough texture and charcoal is very soft, so I don't need to press. The paper's texture is going to pick up a lot of charcoal dust with a very light touch. You are seeing me switch back and forth, and that's because I'm using the charcoal pencil for tight detail areas and fine charcoal in other areas where I'm not as concerned about detail. Chamois cloth will be useful either for dabbing, just to lighten an area a bit, or rubbing and blending, and the kneaded eraser for some light erasing. The texture dimension. So we're looking at the surface of our subject and asking ourselves what kind of mark making is appropriate to express the texture. And I just want to say that anything is fair game. Dots, dashes, lines, marks, erasure, whatever is required in order to express the texture. That's an appropriate kind of mark making. I just want to put emphasis on the fact that these lines, they react to the information that came before. They're lighter in light areas, darker in dark areas, and they're not meant to overpower any of the other information. And that's what creates a sense of symbiosis or balance within a drawing. So at this point, we have a sense of light and dark, the boundaries between different values in the subject and in the background, and we're starting to have a good feel for the texture of the subject. And hopefully, those things have sort of struck a balance, and one isn't totally dominating the others. And if so, then we're doing really good with our multidimensional contour lines. After stepping back and looking at my drawing, I realized that I want to go back to some fundamentals, reworking the outlines of the hut and bringing some structural lines into areas like the rocks. So I'm sort of going back to those three functional lines, lines that appear and disappear, lines that find the outside edge, and lines that come around from behind. Slight tangent, but I just wanted to remind you guys. I mentioned this on day one. A drawing isn't really finished until we take a minute to step back and reflect on what's working and what isn't working in the drawing. And then we take the necessary steps to resolve it. Good starting points are basic questions like, are areas too flat? Are areas in the drawing misperceived? Did I make a mistake that I need to fix? Are some areas overpowering? Don't be afraid to totally rework an area. Don't be afraid to erase as needed. So save time for stepping away from your drawing. Come back and look at it with fresh eyes. Do what needs to be done until you can really live with the drawing. We just recently learned structural lines, and here are some straight structural lines because they seemed most appropriate for the angular planes of these like rocky-like structures. I struggled with the rocks at moments. They sort of didn't look like anything before the structural lines. And that's sort of natural for any drawing where we're challenging ourselves, where we're not just aiming for the low hanging fruit. Structural lines, they're not easy. And several times I sort of made uh, a wrong direction and it didn't feel right. So I had to erase and try again. That's sort of what you have to do sometimes is you do the best you can following your intuition. And if something isn't working, then be ready to erase and try again until it sort of clicks. But don't give up on it. Every good drawing goes through an ugly stage. I'll probably keep working on the rocks. I'm not quite satisfied yet, but you guys get the point. These have been contour lines, 3 dimensions, light, boundaries, and texture. Give it a try. Good luck.